trunk, another a parasol, another a shawl, another a fan, and so on. One article to each, and the longer the procession, the better he was suited, and he was sure to make for some engaged sleeper and begin to hurl the owner's things out of it, swearing that it was ours and that there had been a mistake. Arrived at our own sleeper, he would undo the bedding bundles and make the beds and put everything to rights and ship-shape in 2 minutes, then put his head out at a window and have a restful good time abusing his gang of coolies and disputing their bill until we arrived and made him pay them and stop his noise. Speaking of noise, he certainly was the noisiest little devil in India, and that is saying much, very much indeed. I loved him for his noise, but the family detested him for it. They could not abide it. They could not get reconciled to it. It humiliated them. As a rule, when we got within 600 yards of one of those big railway stations, a mighty racket of screaming and shrieking and shouting and storming would break upon us, and I would be happy to myself, and the family would say, with shame, "There, that's Satan. Why do you keep him?" And sure enough, there in the whirling midst of 1,500 wondering people, we would find that little scrap of a creature gesticulating like a spider with the colic, his black eyes snapping, his fez tassel dancing, his jaws pouring out floods of Billingsgate upon his gang of beseeching and astonished coolies. I loved him. I couldn't help it, but the family, why, they could hardly speak of him with patience. To this day I regret his loss, and wish I had him back. But they it is different with them. He was a native, and came from Surat. 20 degrees of latitude lay between his birthplace and Manuel's, and 1,500 between their ways and characters and dispositions. I only liked Manuel, but I loved Satan. This latter's real name was intensely Indian. I could not quite get the hang of it, but it sounded like Bundur Rao Ram Chundur Clam Chowder. It was too long for handy use, anyway, so I reduced it. When he had been with us 2 or 3 weeks, he began to make mistakes which I had difficulty in patching up for him. Approaching Benares, one day, he got out of the train to see if he could get up a misunderstanding with somebody, for it had been a weary, long journey, and he wanted to freshen up. He found what he was after, but kept up his powwow a shade too long, and got left. So there we were, in a strange city, and no chambermaid. It was awkward for us, and we told him he must not do so any more. He saluted, and said in his dear, pleasant way, "We're good." Then at Lucknow he got drunk. I said it was a fever, and got the family's compassion and solicitude aroused. So they gave him a teaspoonful of liquid quinine, and it set his vitals on fire. He made several grimaces, which gave me a better idea of the Lisbon earthquake than any I have ever got of it from paintings and descriptions. His drunk was still portentously solid next morning, but I could have pulled him through with the family if he would only have taken another spoonful of that remedy. But no, although he was stupefied, his memory still had flickerings of life, so he smiled a divinely dull smile and said, fumblingly saluting, "'Scoose me, Mem Sahib, 'scoose me, Missy Sahib. Satan not prefer it, please." Then some instinct revealed to them that he was drunk. They gave him prompt notice that next time this happened he must go. He got out a maudlin and most gentle "Ware good," and saluted indefinitely. Only 1 short week later he fell again, and, oh sorrow, not in a hotel this time, but in an English gentleman's private house, and in Agra, of all places. So he had to go. When I told him, he said patiently, "Ware good," and made his parting salute, and went out from us to return no more forever. Dear me! I would rather have lost 100 angels than that one poor lovely devil. What style he used to put on in a swell hotel or in a private house! Snow-white muslin from his chin to his bare feet, a crimson sash embroidered with gold thread around his waist, and on his head a great sea-green turban, like to the turban of the Grand Turk. He was not a liar, but he will become one if he keeps on. He told me once that he used to crack cocoanuts with his teeth when he was a boy, and when I asked how he got them into his mouth, he said he was upward of 6 feet high at that time and had an unusual mouth. And when I followed him up and asked him what had become of that other foot, he said a house fell on him, and he was never able to get his stature back again. Swervings like these from the strict line of fact often beguile a truthful man on and on until he eventually becomes a liar. His successor was a Mohammedan, Sahadat Mohammed Khan, very dark, very tall, very grave. He went always in flowing masses of white from the top of his big turban down to his bare feet. His voice was low. He glided about in a noiseless way and looked like a ghost. He was competent and satisfactory. But where he was it seemed always Sunday. It was not so in Satan's time. Jaipur is intensely Indian, but it has 2 or 3 features which indicate the presence of European science and European interest in the weal of the common public, such as the liberal water supply furnished by great works built at the state's expense, good sanitation resulting in a degree of healthfulness unusually high for India, a noble pleasure garden with privileged days for women, schools for the instruction of native youth in advanced art, both ornamental and utilitarian, and a new and beautiful palace stocked with a museum of extraordinary interest and value. Without the Maharaja's sympathy and purse these beneficences could not have been created. But he is a man of wide views and large generosities, and all such matters find hospitality with him. We drove often to the city from the Hotel Kaiseri Hind, a journey which was always full of interest both night and day, for that country road was never quiet, never empty, but was always India in motion, always a streaming flood of brown people clothed in smoochings from the rainbow, a tossing and moiling flood, happy, noisy, a charming and satisfying confusion of strange human and strange animal life and equally strange and outlandish vehicles. And the city itself is a curiosity. Any Indian city is that, but this one is not like any other that we saw. It is shut up in a lofty, turreted wall. The main body of it is divided into 6 parts by perfectly straight streets that are more than 100 feet wide. The blocks of houses exhibit a long frontage of the most taking architectural quaintnesses, the straight lines being broken everywhere by pretty little balconies, pillared and highly ornamented, and other cunning and cozy and inviting perches and projections, and many of the fronts are curiously pictured by the brush, and the whole of them have the soft, rich tint of strawberry ice cream. One cannot look down the far stretch of the chief street and persuade himself that these are real houses, and that it is all out of doors. The impression that it is an unreality, a picture, a scene in a theater, is the only one that will take hold. Then there came a great day when this illusion was more pronounced than ever. A rich Hindu had been spending a fortune upon the manufacture of a crowd of idols and accompanying paraphernalia whose purpose was to illustrate scenes in the life of his especial god or saint, and this fine show was to be brought through the town in processional state at 10 in the morning. As we passed through the great public pleasure garden on our way to the city, we found it crowded with natives. That was one sight. Then there was another. In the midst of the spacious lawn stands the palace which contains the museum, a beautiful construction of stone which shows arched colonnades, one above another, and receding, terrace fashion, toward the sky. Every one of these terraces, all the way to the top one, was packed and jammed with natives. One must try to imagine those solid masses of splendid color, one above another, up and up against the blue sky, and the Indian sun turning them all to beds of fire and flame. Later, when we reached the city and glanced down the chief avenue, smoldering in its crushed strawberry tint, those splendid effects were repeated, for every balcony and every fanciful bird-cage of a snuggery countersunk in the house-fronts, and all the long lines of roofs, were crowded with people, and each crowd was an explosion of brilliant color.